Regular members attending tonight include myself, James Laporta, Phil West, and Keith Bodwell. We will seat alternate Bruce Bennett for regular member Jill Cutler. We will seat alternate member Christine Gray for regular member Stephen Sicardi. The first item on this agenda was a public hearing. It is being continued at the request of staff. Do you want to say anything about that, Karen?
The reason it's being continued is we obviously had to make a change in the regulatory process and get all the noticing out appropriately that would match. So the following agenda item will straighten that up. Yes.
Okay. So go ahead with.
I'm going to request that you modify SP 222 to now SP 253 special permit for major home business as per section 816 home businesses 118 College Street, and continue the hearing to September 14th with that modification.
All right. Do we need a vote on that?
You need a motion and a second. Yes.
Okay. Could
I move to continue make the changes in the agenda and continue September 14th.
I'll second it.
Okay, you have that. Moved
Yes,
by
I do.
Phil, seconded by Keith. Any discussion? Okay, I have been informed that the new legislation, Janelle, correct me if I'm mistaken, requires a roll call vote for all Zoom meetings. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's so,
Or is it only for a public hearing vote?
yes, so not for all, for a public hearing and action item. For these administrative items, it wouldn't be necessary.
Oh, thank goodness. All right, all in favor of that motion, raise your hands.
Aye.
Thank you, Keith. That is a unanimous vote, and that modification passes. I think we are now up to new applications, oh no, I'm so sorry. We're up to approval of minutes. And there are two batches of minutes. The first one I want to talk about is from our last regular meeting dated July 13th. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes as written. You're all just looking at them now, aren't you? Okay, we'll give you just a minute or so. They were fairly long.
I'm actually looking for them.
I am too.
Can somebody tell me what date they were sent?
Oh dear, all right. Karen, you might find that faster than me.
Well, that's a good question because I'm gonna have to open my email. It might be easier if I just.
I was not there, so. That's why I'm going off.
Anna, Stephen's asking if you can send him the.
I see that now. Thank you
Why
so
don't
much.
why don't you defer action on them until everybody's had a chance to read them and I get them back out again? 'Cause I'm
I
gonna
think,
have-
that's a very good idea.
I'll
and
send Steve the email about.
Have
the
you got
meeting.
it? Thank you.
I'll send him.
Bill,
the-
can you CC me?
I'm sending him the meeting link.
Oh, the meeting link. Okay.
Karen will send out those minutes again. And we'll discuss them at our next meeting. Do we need a motion to delay the approval of the minutes? No. Okay. All right. The other set of minutes is from July 13th. Did any of you not receive those minutes?
April 13th.
Sorry, April 13th. Might be faster to ask if you received them than if you didn't.
Those got sent out on Saturday. It's
Well, they're likely on the website too, right?
Let me, I think this is something that we can take care of even without you necessarily having your copy in front of you, because the whole point of amending those minutes was to add on correspondence concerning the home business regulation that had not previously been listed on any of the agendas, even though it was received and was in fact shared with all of you. So you all received copies. There was correspondence, an email from Blaine Matthews, an email from Joanne Wojtachek, a letter from Duncan McClelland, an email from Sam Waterston, a second email from Joanne Wojtachek, an email from Ed and Audrey Furman, a letter from David Colbert, an email from Rocco Botto, another letter from Duncan McClelland, and an email correspondence from Jonathan Berry. Those names have been added to the minutes, which we already previously approved. So what we're approving is the addition of those names. Does anybody feel they can't entertain a motion to approve
I
the
move that
amendment?
we amend those minutes as stated.
Second.
Second, okay. All in favor, raise your hand. Say aye.
Aye.
please. All right. So those minutes are amended. It was a sort of a housekeeping issue. Next, we have new applications and it looks blank. Is that correct, Karen?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, and then we have some pending applications, and that would be the special permit that's going to public hearing next month,
Correct.
correct?
Yes.
Do you want to discuss it any further?
Nope, I don't think anything else needs to be said.
Sorry, very briefly, special permit application is SP 252 or SP 253.
253. I
Okay.
changed the number as well. Yeah. To clarify. Correct.
Good catch.
Oh,
I wish I was more like this.
thank you,
Okay.
Christine.
Karen, you might as well move into staff reports.
Um,
I just sent everybody the June minutes email.
Thanks. Thanks, Phil.
I have very little to report. Office is relatively busy. We have a lot of bookkeeping and activity to take care of at the current time. The new regulations are up on the website. Thanks to Janelle for getting a corrected copy. Thank you very much, Janelle, for doing that work for us.
Could we
And
just pause and ask the commissioners? I did send out to you the new revised, up-to-date revised regulations.
Yes.
And you are all expected to print them out for yourselves and have them available at every meeting.
Yes.
I can make copies. They are long. I can have copies made for you. That's not a big deal. Just send me an email and I'll get them to you. I'll
Okay.
send them off. Yeah, and get them done in heavier paper and double-sided. So,
Okay,
That'd be
That's great.
helpful, thanks.
okay.
So that was the June minutes you just sent out. Are we still missing the July, right?
Oh, sorry about that.
No problem.
Oh, Madam Chair, Steve is being admitted to the meeting.
okay.
And the other last thing I wanted to say was it's become quite evident in my office right now that I have a lot of forms to change. Our special permit forms are kind of outdated with old sections of regulations that we need to take care of. I would like to put on the agenda in the next month or so, looking at what the zoning permit says and have a discussion as to what we all understand is the jurisdiction of my office in terms of approving a zoning permit. I know that question has come up during the public hearings, and anything else that we feel that we need to talk about to move some record keeping and clean up some deficiencies moving forward. So,
That seems appropriate.
And would you like me to do zoning permits at this point, or do you want to just give the floor to Janelle? It's up to you, Anna.
You mean to discuss the content of zoning permits?
Oh, no, the zoning permits is listed at the bottom, or I can do it later. Oftentimes,
We don't usually discuss those, Karen, do we?
I just wanted to open the floor if there's any questions.
Let's do that now, since you have the microphone.
Okay. They're pretty elementary. Storage container down on the old Strobel property under the new ownership. Kate Ward is making some changes to her mom's house at 41 Kent Road so that she can move in with them. Steve and Danielle Heaney are proposing a new garage with car space and room to move their existing two home offices that they have had in their basement. James Young is proposing an agricultural accessory structure that is still under consideration for some additional information being needed. John and Constant Old owners, I should take that S off, is old. They're both owners, but and that is some welcome news. That is the addition to the old barn. Tommy Eucalito is moving forward. He has a great plan that came in and has now gotten passed in some fashion through wetlands. So he is moving forward, and you're going to see some new things in the valley, which is really good news. He's been trying very hard. And the last zoning permit is Three Guys Ski and Ride. They are the ones that moved into the Yutzler's building. They have put up existing signage. Similar to the brew pub that is soon to open, have some requests to make some signage changes, perhaps that would be a little bit more in keeping with what they want to do. So I put that on there so that we would remember that we've got some people that have been waiting patiently for us to make some regulatory changes. So, but they're doing great down there. Thanks to Gordon, the shout out about the new bike trail that you spoke about at the Board of Selectmen's meeting that's making West Cornwall sound like it's coming alive again.
Great. You are reminding me that when we had the special permit hearing for the new restaurant, we promised to start working on amending our sign regulations, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Oh, dear.
They're patient folks are a little bit behind, and they're a year behind. So we've got, but we need to.
We have a little time. Okay.
We need to pay attention.
Anna,
to
that draft has been prepared.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's good to hear. All right. We'll return to this subject again. And Karen, finally, do you want to discuss correspondence and communications?
The only correspondence and communications that is listed is your notes from the 5th Thursday that you and I attended at the White Barn in Morris. We had a great presentation, compliments of Jocelyn Eyre and Janelle Mullen in terms of telling us all the great things that COG does for all the towns that they serve, including my town, New Hartford. And I received some very nice compliments as to the presentation, especially from one member of my own town Planning and Zoning Commission in New Hartford. So thank you, Janelle.
I found it fascinating. You all probably, your eyes glazed over when you got my 2-page single space typewritten summary. But what I found the most interesting was that the big bill passed by our state legislature concerning zoning amendments was only 28 pages long, whereas the cannabis bill was 313, was it, pages long? So if any of you are inclined to read that and then summarize what you learned, we could put you on an agenda in the future for the future.
No, I thought your notes were, I thought it was really nice to have the breakdown of the notes, the way you did it. I did read it and I was like, there was some interesting stuff in there.
Thank you, Phil. That makes it all worth my while.
No, Anna, don't get me wrong, I totally appreciate all the extra work you put into sort of summarizing and pulling together the bits and pieces out of these meetings that you go to and stuff. It's nice to know that we like I can't always make it to those, or I haven't made it to those. And it's nice to know sort of what happened in sort of a digest version.
Here.
It's how you learn. It's how you learn about planning and zoning and land use law. And
Yep.
I want to encourage you to go maybe once a year. It won't be too long from now before you're going to have to go to accumulate your credits for commissioner training.
Yep.
They're getting to chat with and hear discussions by other town commissions and commissioners about the things that they're dealing with is both interesting and helpful. Anyway, that's enough about that. We have the next agenda item, other business proper to come before the commission. I believe Bruce Bennett might have a question for the land use officer. Am I wrong about that, Bruce?
Don't have
Is it in
that.
regard to certain property or
I think we both actually had the question when we had a little brief discussion catching him up on things. What happens to the previously illegal home businesses
Yes.
now
Mm,
that we have a new regulation? Certainly the people who were going to work at their computer station every day are there as a by right. Is everybody else already in place, grandfathered in? That's the question.
That's a really good question. I think that bears considerable discussion at this point, because those people, when you say illegal, the only way I'm probably finding out about them is if they come forward willingly. And the question about how we are going to validate people who have done or had businesses for years that did not require permits when they started them. On the June meeting, there were two permits, two in particular, Brad Hedden. He's been Hedden Electric for over 30 years. Will Evans' mom, Cheryl Evans, his town clerk, told him he didn't need a permit. He put a new accessory building on property that is Hedden Electric, and he exists. And the same with Jeff Fox, who's had his painting business for well over 30 years without any permits on Sharon Goshen Turnpike. So those are some of the questions that we have to talk about as to how to validate, make better records in town hall for what we know about, what we're learning, and have respectful conversations about how things happen and how things are going to be rectified in an appropriate fashion.
That was very well put, and I can hear that I've opened a Pandora's box, which I will hastily retreat from now.
Well, I think it's
No,
important to be able to.
I
do
think
that.
it's an important thing for everybody to think about, including any people that you might know that you question, whether they're family members or friends, if their permits are good, that you need to be able to answer the question, but it's going to have to be a commission discussion.
Bruce?
Karen, when do we do that discussion? I mean, because it's, you know, I think one of the things that a lot of people were concerned about this new regulation, we know that. One of the things that I think we can show by having passed this and created a kind of a watch group where we're now watching over these businesses, that we need to be able to come up with a decision about this pretty quickly. So when would we put that on the agenda?
I think it should be listed as an agenda item, so people who might have concerns, not thinking that this is being discussed tonight, would have an opportunity to see it in some fashion on an agenda that they would feel more comfortable about hearing us talk as opposed to hearing it after the conversation.
I think that's very appropriate. And we should.
Madam
Can we put it on
Chair.
next month?
Let me just let Janelle finish first,
Yep.
Bill.
Yeah, so I would like to jump in just around pre-existing non-conforming uses.
Mhm.
Because they will be considered as such. And effective July 1st, the date of the new regulations moving forward, any new home business coming into town would apply under the new regulations. So it's pretty cut and clear. There's not actually much room for discussion around it because that's actually the manner in which pre-existing non-conformities are regulated pursuant to state statute.
Okay,
Should-
So if any of the businesses that are pre-existing non-conforming chose to expand or change, they would be required to go through the permitting process.
That's exactly
So-
it.
I have a
Nothing-
question.
yeah, go ahead.
So Janelle, does that apply to businesses that were non-conforming under the old regulations as well?
Correct.
So
Just like
even if they-
buildings that are non-conforming under the old regulations.
Correct.
So they were non-conforming before because it was never found out about, but now that we wrote new regulations, they're pre-existing non-conforming?
Right,
Right. So for something to be non-conforming, it's usually one of two things. One, this business was in place well before zoning ever came to be in town.
Yep.
Cornwall does have a pretty old set of zoning regulations, so they were one of the first towns in this area to adopt zoning regulations, and that's 1940. Some neighboring towns, like for example, Norfolk, they didn't adopt zoning regulations until 1978. So
Wow.
Cornwall
Wow.
was definitely like pretty first and foremost when it comes to regulating local land use. So effective 1940, if any business, for example, pre-existed the regulations, they would not need to fall into the regulations. They would be a pre-existing non-conforming use. And likewise with updates to the regulations. So from the basically beginning of the regulations through all of the updates, anything that was non-conforming with updates becomes a pre-existing non-conformity. And there are limitations around the expansion of them, and often a change in the operation is what would bring it to the forefront before the commission or before the ZEO.
Janelle, just for clarification, Cornwall did abandon zoning regulations for a time between the 40s and the 60s. So there was a time when there was again no zoning regulations, which was this quiet time. Some of the
Super
other,
interesting.
some of the
Okay,
other
but-
issues were that
back-
there were some
back on
things
track.
that were created when there was no regulations. And they were told by town staff that they were given. That's what I think we also really need to talk about too, is how some things came to be about. Yeah.
Mhm.
Steve, you had something to say?
Yes, in response to what Janelle said, I think she's 100% right. And then I think that it shouldn't be discussed. It's exactly how Janelle stated it.
We have no leeway. There's nothing we have to say about it. It doesn't need to be on a future agenda. We don't sit here and get to decide which of those quote unquote illegal home businesses we are now suddenly going to go after.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
they're pre-existing, non-conforming, not our problem.
Right. Correct.
Thank you,
So
Janelle.
are you saying that if somebody opened a business last month before this regulation was passed, that's pre-existing?
Correct.
Well, here's the thing, Bruce, about zoning enforcement. The zoning enforcement officer in this town is a part-time employee. She's plenty busy. She does have her finger on the pulse of the town to a great extent, and she does tend to drive around and knows this town inside out and backwards, but she doesn't see everything. And she does rely on complaints from neighbors to help her understand that something's going on that shouldn't be happening. Isn't that right, Karen? Is
Mhm.
that an accurate description
That's
of
an
how-
accurate description. Yes.
how enforcement comes to be? And the commissioners also have some obligation to report things that they might see. So,
But it's not a witch hunt. We're not going after
No,
People
I
like digging up-
don't, no, I don't think so.
No, so Connecticut has very intentionally adopted statutes to protect non-conforming building structures and uses. And this is to avoid problems and also to protect property rights and investment-backed expectations. So the statutes were very intentional that there's a reasonable expectation of what one can do with their property.
As usual, Janelle, you have saved the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a lot of further case law reading should anyone want examples, but
It's okay.
I have just a quick question about that, Janelle, in terms of, obviously, we adopted a new regulation around home businesses. However, does it, when you say that automatically makes anything existing, pre-existing, non-conforming, is there some
So-
leeway?
I don't mean to interrupt, but the important thing is it's pre-existing non-conforming if it's not in violation with other regulations. So it must be in compliance with the regulations that were in place at the time of its inception. And the onus would be on the property owner or the property owner or the tenant, the lessee, to prove that at the inception of the business, for example, that they were in compliance with the regulations that were applicable at that time.
Right.
So if they weren't in compliance under the old regulation and they came into existence last month or a year ago or whatever else, it would not be a pre-existing non-conforming.
It would be out of compliance.
Thanks, that was where I was going.
Yeah, I
Oh.
didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to definitely make sure that that was really clear.
Thank you, because that's what I was trying to ask originally.
Yeah, so when in doubt, that's why it's really helpful to have the archives of all the regulations that existed, because in essence, there are times when land use staff do need to pull regulations off the shelf from 1972 and read what applied at that time.
Right. Okay.
That makes sense. Okay. Any other comments before we move on?
Did we skip, Janelle, did you have something to add under staff reports? Or are you gonna,
My only thing to add was just, should anyone have questions around Anna's notes that regarded the legislation and some updates to the legislation, please, by all means, bring them forth. The legislative session was an unprecedented one when it came to land use reform, so it's a lot for commissions to chew on.
Yeah. Well, we all have our email.
So with regards to that, because there were a few things in Anna's notes on that meeting that from the 5th Thursday about the regulations.
Yeah.
And the Public Act 2129, right?
Mhm.
That's the one you're talking about.
Yeah,
I thought that all 4 of those points about accessory apartments, multifamily dwellings, rural character, and efficient application review. I'm guessing that there's probably some, or certainly some of those, if not all of them, that we need to look at our current regulations in regards to. So I just wanted to bring that forward in case anybody hadn't read Anna's email. That there's definitely some things in there that are very interesting and that we're gonna need to apply as we work on this.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well said, Phil. Our work is not done.
And that's a good segue into the next section of our agenda, which is the workshop section. And I will just respond to what Phil said and remind everybody that that was one of the goals that we had in terms of our review of all the regulations, besides reorganizing them and making them more coherent and readable, we were also going to update whatever new laws have been passed since these regulations were last updated. So when we get to the part about accessory apartments, there will be changes. What I have a question about, if there are changes that reflect state statute, does that still require a public hearing process?
It's a really good question, and the answer is yes, because it is a text amendment.
Okay.
Okay.
There's not much one can, for lack of a better term, argue if the governance is coming from the state.
Right. Well, before we proceed with where we left off last time, I just want to also let all the commissioners know that I want to, at our next meeting, devote some time to long-range planning in terms of what our overall goals would be besides this review of our regulations that we're doing. So I think it'd be good for us to have a conversation around what we hope to accomplish in the short term. You know, the town plan is 10 years into the future. I think we should think about a plan that's 1 or 2 years into the future, what we would like to do together. And so I'm just saying it now so you can put your thinking caps on. I have a few ideas myself, and we'll discuss that next time.
Okay.
So I think, Janelle, the floor is now yours.
Okay, so just to lead in, I want to give everyone the same set of background information. So I think it will be really helpful before we dig into intent and purpose. And it will set the stage for what 8-2 means to us and why we have to pay attention to it. So just in brief, quick little, history lesson for all of us. The US Constitution enabled states to have rights over its own land, and that's through the 10th Amendment. And some powers have still been yielded to the federal government, and such as, federal lands, etc. And otherwise, they remain within the state. And that's, again, under the 10th Amendment. So local government regulates land use, and the Zoning Enabling Act 8-2 tells statutory towns like Cornwall what is subject to the Connecticut General Statute, tells us what regulations and limits the regulations. So the state gives us guidelines, less so guidelines, laws that truly tell us what regulations we can touch upon and what we are limited to do with that power. So municipalities truly only have the powers that have been expressly granted to them by the state legislator. So that's a little bit of background, just for understanding where this comes from and why we pay attention to it. I think oftentimes home rule is what we use to describe Connecticut, and that's very, very true. There's 169 municipalities in the state, and we are all known to do things very differently, which is incredible and one of the reasons why the state is so interesting. But there's also the layer of state governance, which has vested in us the power for local governance. So we do need to pay attention to what the state legislature is in turn putting in place for us. And that's all for the purposes of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Zoning Enabling Act. And in brief, what it does is it tells us what regulations can do, and it tells us very expressly what regulations cannot do. And that is our foundation, and that's the powers that we have. No ifs, ands, or buts. We can't pull other things into our regulations. So that's our starting place. And I just wanted to lay that out there as a background as to why 8-2 applies, even though our local regulations will be unique to Cornwall.
I know that we passed around Public Act 2129. I think I remember that Keith was studying it. Was that what you were studying, Keith, or were you studying 8-2? He left for the moment. Anyway,
I'm sorry, I just stepped away for a moment. You're talking to me,
so
Anna?
yeah, well, at the last meeting, you were studying a piece of legislation. It had something to do with your professional life.
Yes,
And then you sent around a copy to us. Which one
Yeah.
was that?
that was the whole, the planning and zoning regulations from the state of Connecticut. It was the,
So that was 8-2, correct?
I believe so, yeah, I took the test and then promptly forgot half of it, so.
Sounds familiar. Well,
So,
so
So just-
Janelle, would you send around a copy to me and I will forward it to all of the commissioners so you could all read our state enabling legislation.
yeah, so I've sent that
And you
around.
have insomnia.
Sorry.
Keep going.
No, so that was actually distributed to all the commissioners as a tag along to Keith's email.
Yeah, that was last, yeah, she sent that out.
Okay, so it was sent out.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, to make sure that everyone is looking at the text, which is actually effective October 1st of 2021.
Okay.
And what is germane to 8-2 actually begins on page 5.
Okay.
Just as another little background, historically, we were talking about updating our sign regulations, and then it became apparent, this is years and years ago, we did have some issues over signage in Cornwall, probably 12 and 15 years ago or more. And it came up in our regulations. Obviously, we do dictate various aspects about the signs, including lighting, etc. And if you go to the state statutes, I'm not sure if this is still currently the case, but they mention that the only things that we have the right to talk about is height, size, and location of signs. And yet many municipalities regulate many other aspects of signs, and they have them in their local regulations. And I'm curious whether if you know that those regulations, then if they're challenged, are they not upheld because the state statutes only mandate that they can regulate certain things? And if they don't explicitly say that you can regulate things like the backlighting of a sign. So those are, it's one aspect of saying the state allows us to regulate something, and can we go over that, what the state allows, or is it explicit that that's all that we can ever regulate? As well as I'm questioning the fact that the state says that we can regulate something. Does that mean we have to regulate it in their same verbiage? Because,
James.
this is going to come up in our opening statement of purpose probably, and they might have a wording in there that might be something that the town of Cornwall might say, I don't like this type of wording. Can we tweak it? So that's just kind of a generic throwing
So
a
that
question
was-
out there before we get going with what, since we're getting this input from at the state level. How do we have to follow, what rules, and what might they be?
Yeah, there are certain things that are pretty clearly cut and dry in those regulations that require us to act on certain things and limit our actions on other things.
Yeah, so James, I would also keep in mind, so the intent and purpose, which is derivative from 8-2, that's sort of your outline, that's setting your parameters of what your regulations are. So it's a the skeleton of what your regulations are going to be. And it's telling you what can be in that skeleton and what can't be in that skeleton, and the details that you put in it, completely up to you, uniquely Cornwall. However, there are specific things that the statutes are very specific about, and those are the things to pay attention to. So beyond that, there is room, there is leeway. Sometimes that leeway does get thrown out by case law and by settlements and by federal law, like signage. So that's something to pay attention to if something gets thrown out in court. But this is the skeleton, the powers expressly given to us by the state as what we can touch and what we shouldn't touch. But
Okay.
it's not verbatim, so it's very much that, you know, it's designed to, and it gives you pretty broad things like secure safety from fire, panic, flood, and other dangers. Then it's up to the commissioners to discern how does one do that in land use in our town. So there's this framework, but the specifics are to each his own within the state. Does that help?
Yes, I think what'll really be, as we move forward through the process, I'm sure it'll become more like, okay, how are we gonna make this all come together, and what in general might some people have an issue with, and then at what level can we tweak that and what level we can't. So
So section 1 in the regulations, intent and purpose, it's basically your executive summary. It's laying the framework for what it is that the regulations are going to regulate. Oftentimes, it's very, very similar to that 8-2 enabling language, because that's the language that is given to us, determining our powers. And of course, like, should you wish to choose different words than as it's laid out, that's great. It certainly goes above and beyond what a lot of towns opt to do. What we can't do is definitely throw things in there that we don't have the power to govern.
So that's a good segue, because Janelle did send an alternate version of Article 1.1 Statement of Purpose.
Anna, I can pull that up. I mean, it's basically what's in
I
the
think
regulation.
I think it would be great if you pulled it up with the minor corrections. And this stands in contrast to the one we looked at last time that had a lot of the legal language directly transposed into our original statement. So hang on.
Yeah, sorry guys, hang on.
No,
I
it's
have
okay.
to-
I think the Cornwall way, if I may be so bold as to say something like that, is somewhere in between these two extremes.
You know, that's 6 and 7 that are the only two changes, right?
Right.
Yeah, give me one second. Here we go.
So Bruce, you weren't here, but we did during our planning workshop last time take a look at statement of purpose, and Janelle had basically cut and paste a bunch of sentences out of the new legislation. And some of us were a bit uncomfortable with that.
You know, it seems as though that in order for us to be able to look at our regulations, not only do we need to follow or take into consideration what the state is asking us to do, but we need to know what case law has been brought up against each thing that we want to do that will restrict what we can put in our regulations. Isn't that right, Janelle?
Yeah, but that's my job. So I'll come
Your
with
job.
that info.
Good.
There's a great book if you ever want to borrow it that I tend to carry around with me if you want to do some case law reading too.
No, thank you.
And the other thing, Bruce, just as we had the town attorney review our last amendment, I'm fairly sure that any future amendments to our regulations will also receive legal review.
Sure.
So I can't imagine doing it any other way, because we're just a bunch of amateurs, right?
So aren't Janelle, when people are writing the regulations, when zoning commissions are writing the regulations, aren't they actually interpreting what the state is suggesting? And can't there be different interpretations? Or
Yeah,
is it so
Yeah.
strict and so clear from the state that that's not an issue?
yeah, so just keep in mind, so Cornwall has a combined planning and zoning commission. So when you're working on regulations, you're in your planning commission capacity. So you're working within your legislative capacity, which is where discretion comes from. When you're in your zoning capacity, it's less creative and you're very much, are they complying? Are they complying? Are they complying? And you're just analyzing, you know, piece by piece of the regulation in an administrative capacity where you're just looking at, does it check the box? Does it meet the requirement? Does it meet the requirement? So the interesting thing about combined commissions is that you're acting in different capacities at different times and in the given moment to understand what capacity that you're actually operating within. So at this point in time, we're all operating within that planning commission capacity.
Got it.
I think we're the only commission that actually has all three branches of government, you know, the executive. In other words, we make the laws, we judge the laws, and we enforce the laws.
It's such a good
I
point,
don't
James.
like that amount of power, actually, but that's the way it's kind of unique for a planning and zoning commission as opposed to the other general commissions out there.
Mhm, mhm.
Wow.
No, it's very well said. Land use in Connecticut is so complicated. And that's what makes it so tricky.
Okay, run us through this Article 1 now and the
Yeah,
changes
so-
that you would propose.
So Article 1 is your preamble, for lack of a better word. It's your statement of purpose. It's just giving the viewers, the readers, a chance to understand what the regulations are for. And so Chapter 124 of Connecticut General Statutes, that's your land use chapter. That's a great reference should anything ever come up around interpretation of regulations, because oftentimes you will find further guidance from Connecticut General Statutes, because they've expressly given us the power to do the work that we all get to do, working on commissions and working around land use decisions. So,
Chapter 124 contains 8-2.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. 8-2 is just a quick and easy reference, but yes. So this is mostly what is in the existing regulations as of now. The one thing that I do bring into the foray, point 6, is multifamily dwellings, because that is now required. So all municipalities across the state need to discern, they need to identify a zoning district or zoning districts where multifamily housing can be given an opportunity to exist. So that's new, and that is an important update, just because land use reform hasn't been done in this way by the state in a very long time.
So that's one of my questions.
I'm sure there's a lot of discussion here. I have no problem changing the regulations to include that, but I think that's very different from encouraging multifamily dwellings. So I guess I would argue we are allowing a district for multifamily dwellings, but we're not necessarily encouraging them unless that is what we mean to say. And that's what I'm confused about.
So due to this legislative updates, towns now must provide for the development of housing opportunities, including opportunities for multifamily dwellings. So
All right.
Yes. But people can, I mean, we can provide the opportunities. We don't have to encourage.
Yeah, I
them.
think, so Christine is complaining about the old language, the use of the word encourage might not be appropriate. We might want to change that word.
yeah, yep. And that's where like these little word tweaking things unique to Cornwall, absolutely.
So to say something like to allow housing opportunities for all citizens, including multifamily dwellings, instead of encourage.
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, that sounds, but pretty benign.
Yep.
Actually, I still have a concern. and that is specifically calling it out in our statement of purpose could potentially give a developer a right to enforce that upon any district in town, because it's our statement of purpose instead of actually just having a regulation which allows it. So in terms of if we allow it, we can have a section of our regulations talking about multifamily dwellings and where they might be appropriate or how the rules and regs are around it. But if we put it in our statement of purpose, it becomes a tool for a potential developer, I think, to actually to force it in an area that might not be what the town of Cornwall would encourage. So something of this magnitude of change, something that was not previously even allowed in our regulations, to now actually have it in our statement of purpose, I think is a big step for, be like saying we allow, I don't know, 3 acres.
Cannabis stores.
What's that?
Cannabis
Cannabis
stores.
store.
Well, whatever it is, but actually having it in our statement of purpose is like almost right up there with health, safety, and welfare. And we use that as an argument to keep the town intact. So if we have this in our statement of purpose, is actually, in other words, this is almost saying that we shouldn't have single family housing. We should always strive for multifamily dwellings. And I don't think that that's actually the intent of the law or what the intent of Cornwall would want. We
Well,
don't always want to live with our neighbor.
I think,
That makes sense?
yes.
Yes.
James,
makes
it
sense
does,
to me.
it makes sense. I just want to make it clear, a statement of purpose, even if it makes mention of something like housing opportunities or preserving historic sites, I wouldn't necessarily use that as fodder if one were filing a lawsuit against the town for any purpose, because the specifics of the regulations are what actually sets the stage for that. So I do understand completely what you're saying. Like, you don't want to draw attention to it in the preamble, and that's fair and that's just, and that makes a lot of sense. But regardless, that just because something's mentioned, the way in which it's interpreted and applied is the crux of where lawsuits go and where they don't go, just to make that point.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the type of thing that we also don't talk about, say, signage in our statement of purpose either. This is not the end all be all of what Cornwall's all about, is multifamily housing. So I would say something like this, okay, we have to include it. We are welcome to include it. I'm not against it. I'm just saying to actually have it in what Cornwall should be all about and our regulation should be about. I think encouraging housing opportunities for all citizens is a perfect blanket statement. That why do we have to specifically call out multifamily dwellings when there's all types of housing for all citizens?
So
Could we add the adjective to allow diverse housing opportunities for all citizens, just to emphasize that the single family dwelling may not be the only housing opportunity to consider?
Well, I don't think we call out single family housing anyway, right? If we just say to, what was the word we were going to use instead of encourage?
allow.
To allow housing opportunities for all citizens. I mean, I think that sort of covers everything.
That's simple. Mhm.
Well, if it's
And-
diverse, it
and-
also, might be like
I-
a yurt as opposed to a cabin, as opposed to a chalet, castle.
Hey, mobile home.
Which
Um,
has to be regulated
Yeah.
as a single family.
By the way, I just want you all to know, part of what we said we were going to do is keep a master list of the actual regulations that need to be written or rewritten, and I've started. Number
I
one
have.
is signs. Yeah, number two is multifamily dwellings.
Mhm, mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, and James,
I'm in agreement, though. I don't think we need it necessarily in our statement of purpose.
I
Right.
think that's great. Also for the record, James, there are right now, so multifamily isn't mute in the regulations right now. there are some opportunities for multifamily in town.
Yeah, thanks
There
for
are?
bringing that up.
Okay.
Yeah,
It pre-existing non-conforming? Yeah,
so the regulations allow for, not that they exist, but the regulations currently in this form, there are sections they do allow for multifamily housing, just for everyone's
Yeah,
understanding.
when created by a not-for-profit or the town itself.
Oh,
Exactly.
right, okay,
Yeah, just to point of clarification.
right.
So this is not an edible document, and I apologize. I realized that I pulled up the PDF,
fine.
but because I'm recording, it's a little bit tricky to do the switcheroo. So the
Okay.
next, the next is highlighted because, and I don't know why this was a bugger for state legislatures, but the overcrowding of land and undue concentration of population was very explicitly eliminated. So that's definitely where state law is dictating that they don't want to see that language in our regulations. So if we were to leave it out, it reads to provide adequate light and air and to prevent congestion in the streets. We can leave in congestion in the streets and to lessen the danger of fire and flood. If we want to make it something more and acknowledge, other natural dangers, we are also given that leeway. So I would, in thinking through the statement of purpose, I would really think like comprehensively, this is the preamble to the regulations. Is there something that's important that might have been missing when these were first enacted?
It seems like the state's asking us to kind of back away from the natural side of things if they're, it seems like they're focusing on housing, which is understandable, but
It was a big focus of legislation.
yeah,
But
and pulling back from, I think historically, the state was, I mean, a lot of our programs that are based 490 farmland and all that stuff is based on trying to preserve some of the natural characteristics of the state. I'm not sure if this is, it seems a little juxtaposition that they're still have those programs that are very well applied for, but they're not allowing us to talk about
I think one of the
land in general.
I think one of the things when I was reading the stuff is they want you to be very specific on quantifiable things versus things that are more general terms.
Values. This is the same as the whole problem of rural character. These vague kind of statements that don't define what overcrowding is or what undue concentration of population is, have been historically used to limit who gets to live in some towns or who gets to live in certain parts of some towns.
Well, it also makes it very hard to actually regulate. How do
Yeah.
you judge what, it's everybody's opinion,
Right. Yeah.
So you need definable things that you can, in our regulative role, when we're got our zoning hats on, how do we say, does this meet our regulations? And it's got to be something that's definable.
Exactly. Enforceable is too. Yeah.
yeah, and I want to make it very clear to the commission that what the state is doing, it's not so much taking away control or dictating control or taking away local control, but what it's really pushing on municipalities is that there's reasonably objective criteria. And
Right.
that's to get away from these seat of the pants decisions that then are inconsistent across commissions and across boards, so that there's very clear objective criteria that's guiding decision making. And the state's not dictating what that objective criteria is. It's just saying, establish it, put it forth, make it clear, and then utilize that to guide you. So I think oftentimes it is a myth that, you know, this big bad state is telling us everything it has to do. Oftentimes, yes, there's a lot of mandates. We have to adhere to a lot of laws in Connecticut, but there's also a lot of leeway there. Again, going back to that concept of home rule, it's a very unique state that there's 169 municipalities and we all do everything differently. It's not, you can go to many states and you won't see that.
Janelle, do you have a link to the new state or the new state regs up on the state site yet?
Yeah, so that was distributed to everyone with that follow-up email from Keith about 8-2. And what
Okay.
I think might be really helpful, so for 1.1 statement of purpose, I encourage everyone to read from page 5. The middle of page 5 is where reference to 8-2 begins, and read through and see if there's anything there, especially in the underlined language, which is the new language in the legislation that you want to bring forth in your preamble. I think that's really valuable homework. It will really get you thinking about your powers and where it's limited. And I think for our next discussion, to really think through, okay, so this is what's been in the regulations, the statement of purpose, this is what we can discuss, what do we want to be in there? Because it does go on for quite a few pages. It gets through page 8 into what zoning commissions can in fact have in their regulations.
All right, I'm just not finding that email from Keith. That's all, I guess.
So it's an
From
email
Jen.
from me that follows up on Keith's email from last meeting.
It was
So-
July
Thanks.
13th.
Yeah, thanks, Christine.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
And I think it actually started out with an email from Gordon.
Yeah, it's
Monday,
embedded
July
in a
12th,
chain.
9:45.
I can send it again happily.
That would be great.
Yeah.
That was while I was on vacation, so it's,
We'll start fresh,
Somewhere
I
else.
think. And also I think that's a good segue into Anna's task for next time, because it really lays out the bare bones of what it is that we'll be doing. And it gets us thinking around, you know, the 2-year plan, as Anna said earlier, of like what we want to tackle. And then we are shoehorned into tackling some things because of this newly effective legislation. But it doesn't diminish, just to your earlier discussion point, James, it certainly doesn't diminish local control. I think it makes it ever more important that you are very specific locally around what it is that you want in your regulations.
Do they still, you know, our statement number 1 of health, safety, and welfare, that seems like a pretty interesting, broad, undefinable thing that they still allow and encourage us to kind of have an overall responsibility for?
That's actually been updated. So when you look at this Public Act 2129, it actually says to secure safety from fire, panic,
Oh,
which
that's right. remember you
I
talking-
always laugh at because
Right.
I just don't know, like, land use and panic.
We've we've been there recently. Unfortunately.
And then it does say to promote health and general welfare. And again, yes, and sadly, oftentimes, yes, statutes are super vague. And that's where there's some beauty because it's left for your interpretation. And that's where there's some frustration because it's left for your interpretation.
You know, can you explain, maybe just so people understand a little bit more, so why is the state taking such a stance on this all of a sudden, as opposed to, you know, being very lax for the last several decades?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm no legislature, so I can't rationalize the thinking. I can only kind of bring the facts to the commission. And I tuned in pretty closely because it would be affecting all the work that we do. So this year was so it was long session. It started in June and it was all virtual. So that was very unique for a legislative session. So all testimony was virtual. You didn't need to drive to the Capitol to talk around various bills. And Desegregate Connecticut, this initiative around land use reform, was a big driver and a big platform behind a lot of rethinking how Connecticut is zoned and how Connecticut addresses its zoning regulations. A lot of that stemmed from conversations that have been at the national level around equity and housing. And zoning reform just wasn't a thing that had taken off in the state, to my knowledge, for a very long time. There's been layers added to it, but less so amendments made to the framework of land use and to the framework of how towns uniquely govern their land. So the hot button issues, housing, the use of the term character, and equity. So access to opportunity and how land use can truly dictate that. So that was really the crux of a very large discussion, which came to be at this House Bill number 6107. That's where a lot of the ideas and concepts from Desegregate Connecticut came to be and are now enacted into law. And I mean, people spent a lot of time on it. That testimony was 24 hours long. So I tuned into the hearing just to get a sense of who was saying what. And I left my office and I came to my office the next morning and I turned YouTube back on, and the same people were in the same clothes from the night before having the same discussion. So it was definitely a focal point of a lot of the legislation, because as we've learned, land use brings up a lot of things, and it's complicated.
I have to say, just bluntly, that a lot of this, Steve, is trickled down from the whole racial justice movement that we've seen spread
No,
across.
certainly. And I wanted to hear
Yeah.
Janelle's explanation on it. And I guess just for more clarification purposes, what happens if a municipality decides to do nothing?
So
They-
you don't
they-
want, you don't change your regs and you're just coasting?
Yeah,
So they're, like they repeal where your regs are no longer in compliance, they're considered null and void. So if you don't take a stance around, let's just say, for example, this accessory dwelling unit, and you don't either, opt out or adapt them, then pursuant to Public Act 2129, effective January 1st of 2023, it says very explicitly within the regulations that what you have in there is null and void.
so then we would have no regulation,
Well, no, the state regulation would apply.
would prevail.
Yeah, they would
Yeah.
supersede you. Mhm.
So then we would actually end up with something that we might not have wanted. We would have actually maybe a set of regulations that really wouldn't fit Cornwall. They would be governed by the state.
And I mean, I hate to, how do I put this diplomatically? There's many things that the state makes us do that we probably don't want.
Well, certainly, because we're not all, like you said, we're 169 different municipalities, whatever the number was. But no, I just wanted to hear it, just, because I'm sure there's a lot of people zoomed in on our meeting, and they probably have that kind of a question. Well, what if you just do nothing? Or, why can't we just stick with status quo? And so that sort of gives an idea of if we do stick with status quo, what the consequences would be.
And
So we're-
Steve, I want to bring you back to, so the Plan of Conservation and Development, your guiding document that, the town utilizes, that it looks to, that is contingent on funding. So that's a 10-year plan that you update. When I first was hired by the town, that was the first document that was handed to me. It was my guidebook. And that was, adopted and amended in 2020. And that was my blueprint for moving forward. And that is, very much contingent on a funding stream.
Meaning our funding stream is contingent on that town plan. Right.
That our funding stream though comes from the town.
Our funding stream from the state.
Mhm.
How much, well, I guess this is a topic that's getting a little bit
Yeah.
further than we need to get into,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, you're,
I just have another question. So like historically, that's why I was bringing up the sign reg stuff, because that's a benign thing. A lot of towns I know have sign regs that aren't something that the state statutes allow. And yet it's not like the regs for the whole town are null and void because they talk about the lighting requirements of signs. So is there something different going on now with these other regs as opposed to something as benign as a sign lighting regulation?
So the sign regulation is a really unique example because that actually went to federal court. So that was, a federal decision that was made around regulating the content of signs. So that is something like, should a town have regulations that aren't in line with a court ruling, be it, state or federal, because think of our layers of government, so
Right.
federal, state, and then local. Should anyone come before the commission, if they were an applicant and they were a savvy applicant and they were aware of the fact that the regulations were not in compliance, it would be very not prudent of the town to apply them and to enforce them. So oftentimes these things do flush out in the judicial system. That's often when things get brought to public light, or by an applicant. If an applicant were to come, let's just say, I don't want to use an actual town example, but let's just say there was a town that's out of compliance. If the applicant were to come to that town and have a very strong argument and a lot of documentation around why the regulations weren't proper, I'd certainly, as a commission, do the homework and understand before rendering a decision.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, a lot goes into it. Because as we know, there's court cases every month, every week, and it's not something that all of us can stay on top of. But that's thanks to the network of a lot of Connecticut resources around updating of land use law. The Wesleyan training, I think, is a great example of really where they distill all that information and then give it to us as commissioners and land use professionals.
so just to be clear, everybody, we're gonna discuss statement of purpose one more time at our next meeting. At this rate, it will have taken 3 meetings to agree on the change to 1 page of our, how long are our regulations?
There
Your
are
homework, yeah.
88 pages.
right, so. You will read 8.2. You will look at statement of purpose as it currently exists. And you will decide what wording changes you might entertain. And whoever does the homework first and comes up with some suggestions, we could send that around, could we not? Yeah.
So I'm gonna go back to something I was hoping would happen, was that our regulations would just get reformatted and have very little, if any, actual substantive changes happening. In which case, this process shouldn't be that we have to pick apart our regulations at this point. And then we make a list of what those changes need to be addressed for the go around. So at least we then have a regulation that's cohesive and reformatted. And then we can go through and actually say, okay, here's some of the state statute stuff that we made a note of that is problem areas that we need to readdress. I don't know if that's something anybody else thinks might. be a
That's
good idea.
what we all agreed we would do, James, but the part that you've left out is that we agreed we would update at the same time as the reformatting happened, we would be updating to be sure that we're in conformance with state law, which is why the page that Janelle sent around has only 2 changes. It included the comment on multifamily dwellings, which we dealt with, and then it asked us to cross out the prevent overcrowding of land. Otherwise, we could accept the statement of purpose that we had before as is, just with those minor changes.
So-
Well, that's not a minor change, I think, to act. I mean, we all discussed the including multifamily dwellings to have in our statement of purpose. is-
Well, we decided
So-
not to do it.
Exactly. So I don't think this process needs to be something that takes forever, or this is a good example of that the commission's dragging their feet on this. I think it's just a matter of, can we get a reformat thing going, and then go back and readdress the issues, like we need to address multifamily dwellings, or we need to address that we can't have the.
Signs.
I'm not sure. I mean, is it just reformatting, or are we rewriting at a bigger level?
Well, it's easy. That wasn't our intention, I don't think, but it's easy to get inspired, especially with something as important as statement of purpose, to want to have the right to maybe look at some of the language. I don't think we have to. I mean, we could vote tonight if we wanted to accept these minor
think-
changes.
Madam Chair, not to jump in, but I think it would be really helpful for everyone to actually read that public act and to just understand the greater context of what it fits in, given the background of the powers expressly granted to the commission, because there are some things in there that could potentially be conceived as important, that the commission might want to consider. So I think spending some time on that and really reading that is helpful.
So,
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll take my cue from you guys.
Please don't think that I don't want to address it, or that I don't think it's important. I didn't know how much time we want to go through.
Yeah, well, I apologize for making a snarky comment about how long this has taken. It's
And-
surprising, but I think also it's important. So
So,
You
Can
know,
we
other sections we're gonna zip through
so,
pretty short.
Chair,
can I ask, that on the list with multifamily and what was the other one?
Signs.
Signs, that we put on that agenda item of things that we want to tackle, purely the reformatting to put it into a more legible format?
Huh?
So of the list of things that we were talking about doing, which is what James was just talking about, of just the reformatting part, do we
Yeah.
have that on the list to, at some point here, decide that we're not going to keep tackling different sections and just do the reformat also?
I really, really can't wrap my head around exactly what you're saying.
Putting
that-
the reformatting on our kind of on our short
Priority.
list.
Our to-do list.
Yeah, but not just that, because it's on the to-do list. So on the short
Right.
list, on the top of the, within the first 5 items of our to-do list. Let's not
two-year
keep
list.
pushing it to the bottom.
Let's back up a minute and let me restate what we agreed to do a couple of meetings ago. In fact, it's in the minutes, is it not, Karen, from our,
I think so.
yeah,
The June 3rd. Yeah, we just amended that paragraph.
okay. I'm going to read to you what we all agreed to do in July.
Okay.
The P&Z Commission will review all current regulations with the intention of reorganizing them for easier access by potential applicants. If you look at the handout that Janelle already handed out, for example, after 1.1 statement of purpose comes 1.2 general requirements. And she is suggesting that we move those to another section. So that's a reorganizational type change. And the purpose is for easier access by potential applicants. Making improvements in clarity by adding more precise definitions, which we haven't gotten to yet. And making sure any land use laws of the state of Connecticut are acknowledged and up to date. We will not at this time undertake any further regulatory changes. So, and we said we would make a list. So my list is of the actual amendment to regulation that we might need to tackle, either because it's in the POCD or because it's legislative required of us, such as multifamily dwellings, or because we think we ought to, because we know that our old regulation is deficient, such as signs. So
Yeah.
that's what we are doing right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. Sorry about the, that's what I had understood as well. I would just thought maybe we should, because it sounds like the state stuff might be a little more involved than we're
Right.
biting
It might,
off.
but I think if we put in the time now to read that regulation,
Yeah,
and it's only 28 pages. You can
The
handle it.
section, the section that you need to read is
5,
page 7 through 9.
7
I
through
can
9.
do
No,
that.
rather 5 through 9.
I can even do that.
Yeah. So if we read that, it will help us move along faster so that we don't get bogged down in these arguments.
So I don't know whether I missed some discussion about these new regulations that the state have put through, but I didn't read them. And isn't it, it seems like everybody is trying to find out how these will affect our current zoning. Janelle, might it not be a good idea for us to have a detailed discussion of and go over this Public Act 21 through 29 all together so that we kind of understand what the impact is? Or did you all do that already?
We did that.
No,
We did that last month.
Did
We
it?
did that.
We just
We
weren't
had
there.
enough.
Got a summary.
Bruce, we just weren't there.
I know it wasn't there.
I
I
think
wasn't
you'll
there either.
just
so.
read it. Read
Oh,
it.
we weren't there. Okay, I get it.
Read
Right,
it and
right.
look at the minutes from the 5th Thursday, because there's more detail there.
Okay, great. All right.
come
Okay.
with questions too, please, because it is meaty and there's a lot to it.
So email Janelle.
Janelle, we can call you and question you about this thing to get further clarification. Great.
And yeah, and I might have to say, I'll get back to you
Yeah, no problem.
and
Okay.
talk to people in the meantime. Mhm.
So just real quick on that, because I'm looking at it right now. When it's in the brackets, does
Mhm.
that mean it's coming out?
Yes.
That helps explain it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, statute.
Because I'm looking at that and I was like, I see the overcrowding in there and I'm not sure why we're taking it out, but now it makes sense that the brackets.
Yeah,
are
so
removals.
Phil, just to orient you all as readers, the underline is new. So everything underlined is brand new. Most comprehensive relook at the Zoning Enabling Act, to my
Okay.
knowledge. So that's all new. Brackets are getting rid of things.
Okay, so the stuff in the brackets is going away. Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, that makes much more sense now. I was
Yeah.
really confused looking at it.
yeah, no, they don't make it easy for us.
Okay.
Now, I do think we don't all have to become land use lawyers
No,
to function on this commission. But it's not that common for a seated commission to have to encounter such a comprehensive change in the land use law. So this exercise of trying to become more familiar with it should stand us in good stead. I think I'm going to end the planning workshop now. We've done what we could, and I would like to move to the last agenda item, which is the executive session. So we'll ask everyone who is a visitor to please leave the meeting. It's the last agenda item. As soon as we're done with that, we'll be adjourning.
And the recording stops too, right?
The
Yeah.
recording stops too.
The minute the motion to go into executive session is made, and then yes.
Okay, so I need a motion to go into executive session. Thank you, Phil. Do I have a
I
second?
move that we go into executive session, just so.
And a second from James. All in favor, raise your hands.
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
thank you. All right, so
Um,
now we
ta-
need the
Madam
visitor-
Chair,
Yeah,
I'm gonna give everyone just their voluntary time to get off and
yeah,
just so they can do so, and should they not, I will
right.
Oh.
remove them.
Oh, Madam Chair, do we need to include allowing Karen and Janelle
Yes, Keith.
to stay in the executive session?
I guess we do. So that can that be added to the motion? No,
Yes.
yeah, okay. Good thing you're here, Keith. Thank you.
How do I go about stopping the recording?
You leave
You
the
leave.
meeting?
Okay, and then I'll still be able to have the recording, right? I mean,
Yep.
okay, I'll leave then. Sorry,
Yep.
leaving.